You are listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, Orange County's business talk show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.
Welcome to this edition of Critical Mass Radio Show. I am your host, Richard Franzi, and this is podcast number 1013. We all have an inherent bias against venturing into unknown territory. But in today's world where innovation rules the day, we need to overcome biases that hinder new ideas and stifle creative solutions. Co-author of Outsmart Your Instincts, Beth Stores, is joining us today to share how the book that she co-authored can be used to enlighten product development teams on biases that impede innovation. Beth, welcome to Critical Mass Radio Show.
Thank you, Richard.
It's great to have you on the show. And so let me, can we start by you just giving us a brief sense for beyond being the co-author of Outsmart Your Instincts? Tell us a little bit about your professional self.
Sure. So I am president of Ideas to Go. We're an innovation consulting firm, and I'm also a facilitator at Ideas to Go. I've been facilitating sessions for 10 years, helping clients come up with new ideas for products and services and really stretching their thinking in creative ways. And I have a marketing background. I previously worked in CPG, and I used to be a client of Ideas to Go.
Okay. Well, you liked it so much you joined the firm. So tell me, how has what you study and what you write about, how has that changed over the 10 years you've been with Ideas to Go?
Well, that's an interesting question. So Ideas to Go has been in business for over 35 years. I think we're at 39. And we've always been in the creative problem-solving business. But, recently we've started really looking into behavioral science and cognitive biases. And we noticed cognitive biases are shortcuts that the brain takes in decision-making. We all have them. They're inherent in all of us. But we noticed that a lot of what we do really addresses cognitive biases that impede innovation. So over time, and very recently, we really started honing that, and we identified 8 cognitive biases that we think really are innovation killers, and decided to write the book to help people overcome those. And everything that we do in our sessions really goes after those 8 cognitive biases, and we're just much more overt about pointing them out and helping people understand when they're showing up and how to overcome them. So
I'm curious. I love it to have authors here on Critical Mass Radio Show, and we have one here right now in this segment. Beth Stores, and she wrote, co-authored Outsmart Your Instincts. What did you and your co-author, what was the inspiration for saying, hey, there are some number, and there's a lot more than 8 cognitive biases. So how did you figure out that was an area for you to study, research, and then write your book? I'm really curious about that.
There's a lot more.
Yeah, it's daunting how many there are, actually.
But we've been hearing a lot about it. We've been hearing about behavioral science from our clients. We've been hearing about it at conferences. We've been reading about it. And it just really came about in conversation amongst the 3 of us, Adam Hansen, Ed Harrington, and myself. And when we picked 8, I don't think it's really a magic number, but there were the 8 that we felt pretty strongly about. Negativity bias being what we call the Uber bias, the one that kind of, that's the main one that's going to kill innovation. And then the other 7 are very strong contributors. So we just landed on 8 in that way.
So you opened the door for a follow-up question, obviously, here on Critical Mass Radio Show. And can you, for our audience, link, first of all, maybe just briefly tell us what negativity bias means in your world, and then why is that the Uber killer of innovation?
Great. So negativity bias is the notion that we feel that bad is stronger than good, meaning we put a lot more weight against negative things and risks, and we fear loss more than we appreciate gain or the ability to achieve some sort of an opportunity. And this actually is rooted in us. And if you think about cave time. So think back to cave times, and you're a person who is really, really curious, and you hear a rustle in the bushes, and you think you're going to go check that out and see what interesting thing you might find. Chances are you're going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So the other person who's sitting there going, no, don't check out the bushes, don't check out the bushes, they had a very nice, strong negativity bias. They kept themselves safe, and they passed on their DNA. So we're all the descendants of these risk-averse cave people. That's sort of how we like to look at it.
Right.
So negativity bias in today's terms is the tendency to first find what's wrong with an idea, and why it's not going to work, and why it's too expensive, or it's going to take too many resources. And in doing that, you're basically just shutting down ideas. So negativity bias that's why we think it's the uber bias, because any idea that comes up is going to be shot down, and there's always going to be a reason for it.
We're talking with Beth Storrs. She's co-author of Outsmart Your Instincts, and we're talking about the 8 cognitive biases that are innovation killers in organizations. And for a while, I worked for a company where it was clear they were risk averse because there was no downside for not taking a risk. There was no perceived downside for not taking a risk because the opportunity lost wasn't evident, where if you took a chance and you were wrong, it was very clear to others in the organization that you, quote unquote, failed.
Absolutely.
And so over time, it just hardened into a culture that, because it was also an engineering company, which you tell me, Beth, from your work, are engineers, do they tend to have a stronger negativity bias? Is this more prevalent in technical people than in other types, or is it a universal?
It's pretty universal, but I think it depends. There are, like R&D folks who are super creative and just really don't allow themselves to succumb to the negativity bias. And then there are R&D folks who, might have a marketer come to them with an idea, and their first answer is, well, that's not going to work. So it really does depend on the person. But I do totally get what you're saying about, this notion of failure. And I love working with companies when I hear them say that they embrace failure and they allow for failure and they look at failure as an opportunity to learn and not, just you screwed up.
We're talking with Beth Storrs, and we're talking about some of the content in her book, Outsmart Your Instincts. And, it's an easy thing to say. There's no failure. There's only learning. But you can say one thing, but it's your actions and reactions. I lead CEO peer groups here in Southern California for middle market business owners and executives. And one of the speakers that we had come in last year was training on the Edward de Bono work and the different hats. And he talked about the black hat, which is, if you're familiar with the work, it is allowing you to be critical of an idea, but in a confined way. And that's not all you're going to do, but you're going to allow people. And the point from the instructor was, you have to give people the opportunity to say negative things, or else you frustrate them in the creative process. Is that something that you write about or that you've experienced?
So this is how we look at it. So some people, the notion of yes and instead of yes but. So if you have an idea, instead of saying yes but, you say yes and.
Yes.
That can frustrate people. It's a really great way of moving things forward and allowing people to, put out ideas and know that they're not going to get shut down. We take it a step further in our mindset, which we call forness thinking. It's a made-up word. It's grounded in the word for. And what it does is it first identifies what's working and what's good in the idea so that you don't shoot the whole idea down. If you are in judgment mode, you're going to first point out what's wrong and then hope that people will start solving for it. But you want to first identify what's good, because what's good about the idea can be a springboard for more ideas. And then, instead of just saying yes and moving forward, you do need to identify what the concerns were, because not every idea is perfect. You just use certain language to trick your mind into problem solving. So you use language like I wish, or how to, or how might we. And by doing that, it gets the other folks in the room solving, well, how might we do that? And then you have several answers for the concern versus just saying this isn't going to work, and here's why.
One of the members in one of the groups that I lead talked about their culture where when they're doing strategic planning, they willfully ask people to tell them what is everything you could think of that could go wrong with this idea, and then they make it very playful to have fun with the fear of all the things that could go wrong. And also what he said was that really helps them to plan to mitigate the downside of an idea. So the group thought that was a pretty interesting way to make it playful. And I'm wondering, we have just a few minutes left here before the break, but how can a more playful approach to the creative process help the people in an organization to get the most out of each idea?
Yeah, so I think that, what you were talking about could definitely work depending on what stage you're in. So if we're in idea generation stage, playfulness is really a fantastic way to come up with lots of ideas and make sure that you're getting multiple ideas around each opportunity area. So we use a lot of techniques. For example, one of my favorite techniques is an exercise that we call Get Fired. And what you do is everybody comes up with an idea that is so horrible that if you were to present it to your management team, you would immediately get fired. So it's like illegal or immoral or inappropriate in some way or just wrong. And then you pass it to a partner, and then that partner takes that idea and uses it and says, okay, what's really good about this idea? What's interesting about this idea? And uses that to come up with more ideas. Okay, what are my concerns around this idea? What do I wish for? How can I improve it? How can I make it work better for us? And then that comes up with more ideas. But without having that little fun and really stretching, you wouldn't necessarily come up with all of the ideas that result from that kind of an exercise. And there's several of these kinds of exercises in the book that are pretty easy to use.
Okay,
on a day-to-day basis.
We're going to take a break here and it's a short break, ladies and gentlemen. For our loyal listeners, you know that these commercial breaks are few and far between. There's only one per episode, and it only lasts about 30 seconds. So don't go anywhere. When we come back with Beth, we're going to talk more about her book, Outsmart Your Instincts, after this word from me.
If you are an Orange County business executive, this message is for you. Do you ever feel isolated with no place to turn for advice or feedback? Who holds you accountable to your commitments in your company? Where do you find the right resources to help you and your company grow? If you have these questions, then Critical Mass for Business might be the answer for you. Critical Mass for Business is committed to helping you make better decisions. These are groups of peers running businesses just like you, providing a great sounding board to test ideas and concepts, review plans and goals, and present issues and opportunities for discussion. The result is improved strategy, accountability, people, and execution skills. If you are interested in learning more, go to www.criticalmassforbusiness.com and learn more about our executive peer group.
Welcome back to this edition of Critical Mass Radio Show. I am your host, Richard Franzi. That's right. All of our shows can be heard anytime on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker.com, several hundred former guest websites whose CEOs have appeared on our show. Since 2009, when we started our show, we've reached several 100,000 listeners through our live stream here on octalkradio.net and our podcasts, which are available on all the ones I said above. Simply type in Critical Mass Radio Show in your favorite podcasting software to find our weekly shows. I'd like to return to talking to author Beth Storrs about her book, Outsmart Your Instincts. Beth, if you had any advice to give to a CEO or a business executive who is planning to write a book and get it published, what advice would you give to them?
Don't do it alone. Get some help. So this was a collaborative effort, which was fantastic. And I don't mean that you have to have a co-author. I mean, it was fantastic that the three of us were able to work together and be co-authors on the book. But we did get input from other people. We had a little session with some folks from our company to explain, what this was going to be all about and get their input and thoughts on some things that we could include in the book that maybe we hadn't thought of. The other thing is definitely get somebody else to read it, because you have so much knowledge about your topic, and that's the curse of knowledge. It could turn into the curse of knowledge, where you think you're being clear and you're explaining something, but you just know too much about it. So having somebody who maybe isn't as knowledgeable as you go through it and give you their thoughts on where you might be, grazing over something, is really, really helpful. And then I think deciding on, a publisher that's really going to work with you. We talked to 3 different publishers, and we landed on Greenleaf, and it was such a great experience. So you just really want to make sure that you have really good conversations with your potential publishers before moving forward.
Wow, I'd ask our engineer to ring the gong so that people know, because loyal listeners here on Critical Mass Radio Show know that when they hear the gong, if they're listening to the podcast, then maybe they weren't totally engaged in the last couple of 30 seconds or so, they can spin it back and pick that up, because those nuggets that you just gave, Beth, are priceless. Thank you for sharing your experience as a published author.
My pleasure.
So can you tell us, through the process with your co-authors of writing this book, was there anything that the 3 of you learned about practical ways to turn naysayers into innovators that you guys didn't know prior to writing the book?
So I wouldn't say that it's something that we didn't know prior to writing the book, but it really crystallized on how clear the cognitive biases tie to naysayers and helping them become innovators. So I talked a lot about negativity bias already, so I don't think I need to cover that again, other than to say, if you have a naysayer and they're saying yes, but ask them what they're for. Ask them what they like about the idea, and then ask them what they wish for to make it better, because then you can sort of push them to be more of a problem solver and less of a naysayer. I think the other thing is confirmation bias. People tend to look for information that will support what they already think they should be doing, and then they are less open to the ideas of others, which will then result in them being a naysayer to other people's ideas.
Right.
So helping folks see things from another perspective, bringing in other people that they might not necessarily be exposed to, like their customer, for example, or doing role play exercises where you put on a totally different hat and come at the problem from a different perspective, can really help people see things through a different lens and then be less of a naysayer. So I wouldn't say that it's something that was came up new while we were writing the book, but it did all crystallize how tightly this is really tied to cognitive biases.
So you've given us 2 of the cognitive biases that are in your book. We have a few minutes left here on Critical Mass Radio Show. Beth, of the other 6, are there any other points that you would like to make that I didn't ask you here that would help our audience of CEOs and business owners to understand this material?
Yeah, status quo bias. Status quo bias is, I'd say, one of the other really big ones. And what happens is, whatever the status quo is, never gets evaluated with as much scrutiny as other new ideas. So you have what you're doing, and then someone comes up with a new idea and another new idea, and those new ideas go through the mill with people, shooting them down or trying to figure out what's wrong, but nobody does that with the current status quo. So it sort of skates by, and then if the other ones get shot down, then you're stuck with the status quo. So you really want to make sure that when you're evaluating ideas, you're evaluating the status quo with as much scrutiny as the others. And then there are different exercises that can really help to break out of the status quo. One of my favorites is in the book. It's an exercise called Dream, where you write down you think about whatever the current situation is, and then you write down anything that you would delete from that, just take away completely, anything that you might reduce, which is just dial it down a little bit, enhance, something that you might dial up a little bit, add, just completely add something to it, or maintain, because there's parts of the status quo that are working and, you know, really make sense, kind of like table stakes. And doing that exercise can really help shift the team to some new thinking.
Well, I love, first of all, I love exercises and techniques that are into an acronym that make it easier to remember. So DREAM is a great one. But I also love a book that has practical exercises and information that small and middle market business executives can implement, because I'm always looking for books that if you spend the time to read it, you can actually implement the material as you're reading it and certainly afterwards. And it sounds like Outsmart Your Instincts is exactly that type of a book. So if anybody in our audience is compelled to want to buy your book and read it, where would you suggest they go, Beth?
Well, first, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. That was definitely our goal. So we are, the book is available on Amazon.com. And if you're interested in hearing more about, hearing more of our content, we've got a bunch of additional content up on ideas2go.com.
And that's the website, Ideas to Go. And where are you located, Beth?
We have 3 offices. Our headquarters is in Minneapolis, and we have another office in Morristown, New Jersey, which is where I'm from, and another office in Orlando, Florida, as well as a satellite office in Dallas, and there's other employees kind of all over the country.
Okay, so if someone is not in one of those places, they could still engage your firm potentially for a consulting agreement?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we've got 3 facilities in each of those markets, but we work anywhere, and we also work globally as well.
Okay.
So depending on the needs of the client, we either have them in our home or we go to where they want to go.
So I don't know what's your cadence for your next book, but it's been my experience that after the author writes their first book, they get the bug, and there are other books that they can create. So if you and your co-authors come out with a follow-on book to outsmart your instincts or a new book on new content, please keep Critical Mass Radio Show in mind. We'd love to have you back on the show, Beth.
Thank you so much. We definitely have been bitten by the bug, so
okay.
I will definitely take you up on that, Richard. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
I love the work you're doing. I think it makes practical sense, and it is these cognitive bias. Once you have an understanding of what they are, you can begin to recognize them in your everyday life, which is the first step towards helping to reduce their influence over your decision making. And so thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to thank our engineer, who's none other than the station owner. We're lucky today to have him be our engineer. He is Paul Roberts. Our producers are Joan Park, Crystal Nunley, and Haley Stern. I'm your host, Richard Franzi. If you'd like to learn more about this radio show and podcast or my firm and the CEO peer groups that I lead, then visit criticalmass4business.com. And until our next show, I hope all of your business decisions will move your company in a positive direction.
You have been listening to Critical Mass Radio Show Business Talk Show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.